for me, like kind of keeping sane meant that I wanted to play baseball and have a balance of not just doing academic coursework in physics and chemistry and material science. It was also kind of being active, being physically active and playing on a team and getting a community there. So that was very important.
Welcome to LatinX Can, a podcast showcasing Latinx professionals who turn their dreams into realities. I'm your host, La Doctora Jenire Flores Delgado, and today I'm here with Dr. Mike Vasquez, a former student-athlete at MIT whose passion for sports led him to develop a career helping companies adopt additive manufacturing. And he is here to tell you, sí se puede, my friends, sí se puede. Dr. Mike Vasquez, welcome to LatinX Can.
Thank you so much for having me.
I am so excited to have you here and for people to learn more about what you do and your experience. So let's start by talking a little bit about your story and where your story begins.
Yeah, so I'm originally from Minnesota, so grew up there. I love playing baseball, and that was kind of my passion growing up. I was good at math and science and wanted to be a professional baseball player, but when that didn't pan out and I couldn't throw 90 miles an hour, kind of settled on engineering instead. I studied materials engineering at MIT and happened to find a lab there called the Sports Innovation Lab that was doing research on sports equipment. And so right up my alley, I played baseball on the team there, and a friend of mine from the team let me hold the clipboard and take some notes on the work he was doing just so I could get some experience as a freshman. And yeah, that's where it kind of started as on the engineering path.
That's cool. Tell me a little bit more about growing up in Minnesota. You have a Mexican-American background, and your family comes like all the way from, I think you mentioned sometime in like the 1920s, if I'm not wrong, your grandparents came over. Yeah,
so I'm not sure on the exact dates, but certainly my dad's side is kind of the Mexican side, and we grew up in a small town called South St. Paul, which is about, it's south of St. Paul. It's on the Mississippi River.
Descriptive.
Yeah, it's a like the next like kind of city outside of St. Paul, and known for the stockyards or the Packers as the mascot, and so my dad went to the same high school as we did. My brother and I did, and then my grandma also went to the same high school. So we had this thing called Heritage Hall in the lunchroom that had all the pictures going back of all the classes, and so you could see kind of 3 generations up there.
Oh, that's cool. It's very nice to see like your history, your family history in the school hallways, right?
Yeah, it's kind of fun. So you can kind of see around all the different classes and the hairstyles as well.
That's funny. So you grew up in this town, and you mentioned that this is a place where most people wouldn't leave the town or even maybe the bigger city in Minnesota to go to college. And then you actually applied to MIT, right? So that would mean going from Minnesota to Boston. And so I wonder, where did that aspiration come from? How do you hear about MIT? And then what was the reaction like when you actually got accepted and were heading that way?
Yeah. So, I didn't think I had a shot in going to MIT. I happened to I think I did well on like the PSAT that you take as like a sophomore or junior or something. And got this little blue brochure from a program called MITES, which is the Minority Introduction to Technology, Engineering, and Science, which is a summer program, that kind of nerd camp that MIT hosted every summer for students around the country. And so I applied, got into that, and did well. We had a very good kind of academic program at my high school. We were IB, International Baccalaureate, but at the same time, kind of to your point, like most folks stayed in the Minnesota area, family reasons and things like that. Minnesota, Wisconsin, kind of Iowa area. And yeah, I didn't have it on my radar, but once I got in, kind of opened my eyes, like, hey, like you work hard, you can do well. And even if you don't know anything or take the best classes or go to the best ranked high school, like you can still be successful. And so that was a big lift up, and that gave me the confidence then to apply to there for actual undergrad and other schools.
That's amazing. Yeah. And I think that's key, right? What you said is like, I remember one of the stories that I can identify with is just exactly that, not really thinking anything about it, or maybe looking at these Ivy League schools like they're like untouchable and only the smartest people can get there. And like, I remember I did the IB diploma, but in a school in a country not called Eswatini. It's in Southern Africa. And so I did well my first year, but I was just like trying to learn English and learn the IB curriculum at the same time. So everything was just too much. And I was just trying to survive. And when it came time to start applying for a university, our counselor, he's like, hey, like he stopped me in the hallway one day and he's like, hey, Janire, are you like applying for a university? And I was like, yes, of course I will apply. And he's like, okay, like I didn't see your application to Harvard. And I was like, I don't think I can get into Harvard. So why would I apply? And he's like, no, your grades are super good. So you have to apply. And then I was like, okay, fine. But I applied. But at the time I was like, if Harvard doesn't have a good swimming and diving team, I'm not going. Okay. Like that's not my priority.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think it's just, you don't know what you don't know. And so I had parents that were very supportive and helpful in helping me look at schools and kind of go through the process as well as some teachers. And so I think it's just sometimes you just got to get out of your own way and kind of just go for it and not worry about kind of your perceptions of what some place might be. Because I think at the end of the day, people are just people. So it's not.
You make it your own, right? Like, yeah. I think the important thing is just to get there and then get comfortable as you can and then make it your own place and do your own thing.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, for me, like certainly the academics were great, but for me, like kind of keeping sane meant that I wanted to play baseball and have a balance of not just doing academic coursework and physics and chemistry and material science. It was also kind of being active, being physically active and playing on a team and getting a community there. So that was very important. And that was a great part of my time there. My closest friends during school were some of my baseball teammates. So.
Yeah. Yeah. And how do you find time to do all of those things, right? Because you mentioned that you did some research starting from freshman year with some of your classmates. You played softball or baseball? I can't remember. I'm sorry. Baseball. And you were actually the captain of the baseball team at some point. And then you also did your workload at MIT, which is known for being a rigorous curriculum and a very busy place to study. So how do you manage to find the time to do it all?
Yeah, I mean, I think I'm pretty disciplined in terms of kind of my schedule. And I think that allowed me to be like have more flexibility to do things. I mean, I also wasn't I wasn't a straight A student and I was okay with that. I didn't need to get straight A's there. Kind of B's and C's, I think I were very happy with. And yeah, I mean, like I value my sleep. So I was usually asleep by 11:30 at the latest. I'd get up by 6 o'clock. I do a lot of work in the mornings. That's my preference now. I mean, I get up much earlier now, but I think having that, like I was always more efficient, like when I had a lot of stuff to do, whether it's a baseball game and especially baseball, it's a big time commitment in the spring. I mean, games are kind of unknown amount of time. You're traveling kind of an hour and a half. So usually a lot of days when you have games, and it could be 30, 40 games in the springtime, which is condensed kind of March to late April.
Wow.
You're traveling 3-4 days a week. You have games, like you'd go out in the field by 2 o'clock. You're not back till 7 or 8. You get kind of a couple hours to do your coursework and make sure you hit classes. And so you do the best you can. And you know that you always have in the back of your mind that lots of other people have done it. It's not impossible. And so like you just kind of get to it and do the best you can.
Yeah, you're bringing me back to those days also, because I was a diver at UF when I was in my undergrad. And that was the first time where diving competitions were really long. The lines, because it's one by one, right? Like, so you have to wait for all 30 people to go before you go again. And you do that 5 times. So the competitions will be very long. And I remember I'll bring my huge chemistry book and I'll sit on the corner and just wait for like the first 25 people to go through, and then I'll do my coursework. And then in the last 5 that were in front of me, I'll get up, I'll warm up, I'll like get in the zone and then dive off the 10-meter platform. You know, you got to do what you got to do to get the workload done and then also do the athletics part.
Yeah, absolutely. And I valued, I mean, the physical part, I mean, being active, and even in the off season when we weren't practicing, I mean, going to the gym and things was always a big part of my routine, just for mental clarity, for kind of relieving stress as well. And I'm not a, I'm not a good person that can read in the car. I get motion sickness. So I couldn't take books on the bus, and like out in the field, you're not taking a book. So like for me, it was like, hey, it's baseball time. It's school time. It's kind of homework time, whatever it may be. And so trying to kind of be pretty regimented about that sort of thing.
And so then after MIT, then you decided to apply for a PhD program. And what I find interesting about this is that you applied to the University of Loughborough.
Yes.
Is that how you pronounce it?
Yep.
In the UK. And most people actually come to the US to do their PhD, but you were motivated to go abroad and then do that experience in the UK. What was the motivation there? Why did you decide to go to the UK to do your PhD? And what was that experience like?
Yeah. So my junior year in school at MIT, I'd been working at this sports innovation lab at MIT, kind of doing some projects. And we had a very good relationship with Loughborough University in the UK, which is it's about an hour and a half north of London. They're kind of known for the sports university in the UK. So like some of the top teams and athletes kind of go there to train. And they also had this really cool sports technology degree program. And I got an introduction to a consulting company that was kind of a spin-off of that lab, and I spent a summer there as an intern. I'd always wanted to do study abroad, but that wasn't really a possibility with baseball. Like you're practicing all year. So I spent a summer there, really liked it, met some great people, like awesome facilities, even probably certainly better than MIT at the time on some of the equipment that they were being able to do. And just like the vibe of it. It was also one of those things, as I looked at kind of PhD programs, I ended up staying an extra year to do a master's at MIT and then to the PhD at Loughborough. And what I appreciated about it was, one, it was only 3 years, which is good after doing master's,
for sure.
but it's also very much industry focused. And so the projects that we were doing were sponsored by the likes of Adidas and Puma and Canterbury and a lot of other kind of commercial entities that had practical outputs. And so that was always something that was exciting to me, was have something that you work on that's more near term, 3 and 4 years out versus 30, 40, 50 years out. And so you stay at somewhere like MIT, it's a different working culture. It's also, I'd been there for a while. I don't know if I would have gotten in, but I didn't want to I wanted something different. And certainly the opportunity to live abroad was appealing as well. And so that's where there's a project involving 3D printing, which I'd been introduced to kind of around that time, kind of developing new materials for 3D printing related to snowboards and snowboard bindings, sponsored by Burton Snowboards. And so I spent time in the UK kind of doing the PhD part and the research part, learning how to do all the like testing and kind of PhD type things, but then also spent my summers or my winters kind of as a kind of work placement student at Burton in Burlington, Vermont. So I got to go back and forth.
Do you get to test the 3D printed snowboards?
Absolutely. So I had to learn to snowboard first. I think my first week we're at a good big snowfall. I'd skied kind of growing up in Minnesota. You're going to do one or the other, but I'd never snowboarded. And so if you work at a snowboard company, you got to snowboard. And so it took me a few days to kind of get somewhat competent in going down the runs and get to a point where like it mattered what I actually had on my bindings. But yeah, it was a great time. I had some awesome mentors, John Cross, Ryan Larson, to help me kind of build some kind of actual experience in the industry. We were doing some super cutting edge stuff at the time that ended up like 10 years later, like being commercialized. And so it was a very fun time.
That's awesome. And so when you were doing your PhD, you mentioned this is a time where you got to develop your skills and your knowledge in additive manufacturing. This was cutting edge research, right? And we've talked to additive manufacturing professionals in the podcast before, but I feel like probably we haven't explained well what additive manufacturing is and how it compares to traditional manufacturing. Can you talk a little bit more about that and just sort of explain to our audience what the difference between additive manufacturing is and how it relates to manufacturing?
Yeah, so the broad term additive kind of plays off what conventional manufacturing kind of is like subtractive manufacturing. So like imagine taking a box and like shaping out a bracket or something like that, like where you're removing, you're starting with a lot of material, then removing it kind of to get the part, kind of like a sculptor would do. Whereas additive manufacturing is more of a layer upon layer process where you start with a digital model and you kind of build the part layer upon layer. It can be out of plastic, it can be out of metal, it can be out of composites. And the advantage there is it starts digital, so it's easy to send some of those files, but then you don't necessarily need things like tooling or molds to build parts. And so you can build complex geometries like this. This is one of the products we worked on at Burton. This is a snowboard binding kind of from 10 years ago. So it's just a little bit easier to kind of skip one of the sometimes more expensive steps, which is tooling. And so it's good for some complex shapes, maybe doing customization. It was developed about 30 years, or well, in the kind of the early 80s. So it's about 40 years at this point. And so it's just kind of getting into the stride where it's more used for production applications, whether it's hearing aids or Invisalign or aircraft components, like you mentioned.
Yeah. So the difference between additive or 3D printing and traditional manufacturing is that everything starts digital, right? It's a design and then you start from there. And then in people that may not be familiar with the industry may think that the majority of the jobs in the industry are for engineers, scientists, material scientists, things like that, PhDs. And you have had the privilege to work with many different companies as part of your consulting firm. And you've actually realized that that's not at all the case. And there's a huge difference between like what the industry is and the types of jobs available in the industry and what people know is possible. Can you talk a little bit more about that and how you're trying to match the gaps in the industry with opportunities for the community?
Sure. So I'll start back a little bit. So after I finished my PhD, this is kind of 2012, 2000-ish, I started a consulting company called 3 Degrees. It's kind of been my primary kind of source of income for the last 10 years. But through that, I get to work with a lot of different companies, automotive, aerospace, kind of big companies, small companies, all focused on 3D printing or kind of evaluating how it might work in their company. So I have a materials background and that's helpful because we get to work on a lot of different materials projects. But because the technology involves so many different steps and it's very multidisciplinary and growing, many companies are struggling to find kind of what's the right pathway to recruit people, find the right background for what they're trying to do, and ultimately grow within the company and support some of these ventures. So there's the traditional path. There's kind of what I did and go get an engineering degree and you get some background and you can start on that front. However, there's not that many programs that are doing that. Like there's not that many engineers, there's more companies and things. So like how do companies find other resources to hire and people to look at? And I was hearing this all the time, like, hey, like like, do you know any people that could work for us? And then it come back to a place like Chicago, where certainly there are neighborhoods that are not as well developed, like not as much community growth or
resources.
Yeah. And you wonder like, hey, like if like everywhere I go, like people are looking for like help wanted signs, right? And they come here and like the unemployment's like 10% or 20%. And so I started to think, it's like, okay, what's the reason for that? And kind of my hypothesis and kind of what I think is it's more of a PR issue than skills issue. It's not that people can't do these jobs. It's more like they don't know, well, you don't know what you don't know. And so in some ways, like the companies that are growing in 3D printing, like the average person on the street that has no connection to a university or a family or like a friend in the space would not know these companies as well as I certainly do. And so the idea was, hey, can we start a program that really just helps boost some of the PR of what is it like to work in this space at an entry level, like so people who are maybe just graduated high school or doing some part-time college or working at Amazon or Walmart or Big Lots, wherever it may be, can come and say, hey, like this sounds interesting. I like to work with my hands. I can show up on time. Like that's kind of my basic requirement. And we started this program called AMX that helps with kind of three things. Like we educate them about kind of what does 3D printing entail? Like who are the companies? Like how does the process work? How do you print something? How do you make a digital model? We then take people on tours across like big facilities in the Chicago area and show them like, hey, like this is what it looks like inside a facility. I kind of like these white windowless buildings on the side of the highway, right? That you can't get into, right? Like there's all sorts of cool stuff going on. And then the third part is kind of getting them a mentor so they can build a network in the space. So again, like it's just building familiarity in the space. So we've done that. Started a couple of years ago. We've done 3 cohorts. We're going to do another one this spring. We've placed people in full-time jobs, and kind of just the basic idea is like, okay, it's PR for like, what do these jobs entail? And like, you come to find out like, hey, it's kind of cool to see a laser melt a piece of metal and make a part that goes in a hypersonic vehicle. And like, people might want to work there. And so,
for sure. I think the additive manufacturing industry, I worked there for a couple of years, and it's so cool. All the really cool things and shapes that you can do. And for example, I was mentioning an example with a rocket nozzle because that's what we were working with in the company I was in. And then just understanding that to get a rocket nozzle before additive manufacturing, it would take years and years to build something like that. And now you can actually get it done in less than 6 months. It's like mind blowing, right? It's like, wow, this is amazing. And what a difference it can make.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's one of those things too, where like for folks looking to get a job in it, like they're sustaining careers. I've been in it for 10 years doing my own thing. Like it's been around for 20, 30 years at this point. And so there are careers here where you can grow and kind of get a salary, get benefits and kind of do cool work like you're mentioning, whether it's in aerospace, medical, whatever industry it could be. And that's the other cool part is like it applies to a lot of different spaces, whether it's sporting goods where I started out or making medical devices or automotive components. It's a lot of different applicable skills.
Yeah. So you mentioned that you've done 3 cohorts so far, and you have placed people into jobs. Can you paint a picture of what life after the program can look for as somebody that goes through the program and gets a job?
So as part of the program, we go on these tours, as I mentioned, and many of the companies that we go to are like, hey, like here's some job positions, here's some job recs. And so several of the students have kind of reached out to these companies. They're doing roles now where they're helping put together kind of equipment. They're helping with post-processing of parts. They're building machines. They're running printers. And so kind of a mishmash of a lot of different stuff to get their hands dirty and start a career in the space. And so some have gone on to think of their own ideas and have gone to local accelerators with a business concept and started tried to start a company. And so variety of different pathways, and we're still growing it and still learning. So, I mean, we started it just really as voluntary. Like we didn't have any funding. We don't charge students to do it. It's just more like kind of a way to give back.
That's fantastic. And so you mentioned 2 of your requisites for people to sort of join the program is to say, I can show up on time, or I like working with my hands. But what are some of those requisites that people need to meet in order to get accepted into the program?
That's about it. We're not super judgy on that. I think we've done it. The first couple cohorts have been focused on the west side of Chicago. Okay. So we were partnered with a neighborhood organization. So like there was some geography constraints, but there's not really, age didn't matter. We've had people like from 20 to 60 years old or like 50 years old do it. And so if you're enthusiastic, you're willing to learn, kind of cooperate and show up.
That's all you need.
Yeah.
And then you mentioned that you're going to start your next cohort in the spring. Where can people find information about the program and where can they go to apply?
Yeah, so there'll be a couple this year. The first is likely going to be with a kind of more targeted group, but the next one, we'll have it on our website at 3degreescompany.com, and I think it's /AMX, so the Advanced Manufacturing Experience. people can go and you'll see registration there once it's live. But we'll do likely a couple this year, and we're hoping to kind of find partners across the country to kind of replicate it and kind of take it forward as well.
All right. Fantastic. And so tell me a little bit more about what 3D Grease does and what is this company that has sort of fed your family for the last couple of years.
Partially fed. I mean, my wife works as well. Okay. So I started the company straight out of finishing my PhD. I had another kind of offer. This is kind of 2012 time frame. I was likely going to stay in the sports space, kind of coming back to Chicago, and I'd met my now wife kind of back here as well. And so I wanted to be in this kind of region, and had a job offer, kind of fell through, and was kind of looking for kind of what's next in terms of finishing a PhD and kind of moving forward. And wasn't really finding much in terms of additive manufacturing or even sports. And it was kind of a depressing time. But
it was luckily a tough time economically as well, right?
2012. Yeah, certainly. Yeah. And a friend of mine had started his own kind of recruiting consulting company. I started kind of doing some part-time work with him while I was figuring some stuff out, and happened to give a couple talks at a 3D printing trade show. And a few companies came up to me after and said, "Hey, like, we got some questions. Like, would you mind consulting for us?" I'm like, "Sure, I can do that." And so I started informally doing kind of consulting work in conjunction with kind of this recruiting company. And eventually, like, the 3D printing stuff got more occupied more and more of my time. And I think the first year I made like $12K total. The next year kind of started to grow and kind of be more sustainable. And so I've been doing that for about 10 years, where essentially we work with companies, and I say I've got a couple of kind of part-time people that help on various projects, but really help companies figure out technical challenges around additive, whether it's designing new machines or materials, helping integrate metal printing into a medical device company, helping kind of an aerospace company set up a facility. So that's been the main work that I've done. And certainly in the last 4 years, it's branched off a little bit. We've started the AMX program. We also started a software product called Trace AM, which has been started as an internal tool that we use to track 3D printing data and manage and analyze that data. Now we're actually commercializing that and getting some traction as a commercial product that will kind of spin out to a different part of the business.
The software is a commercial product, not the data, or both?
Correct. The software is the product. Yep. It's for people who are kind of going through the process of qualifying 3D printing for an end use product and need to organize their inspection data and all their materials and their recipes for all their parts. And kind of keeping that organized in an efficient way.
Yeah. And then you mentioned, so you started this consulting company sort of like by serendipity. People came and talked to you a little bit about it. And then you said, okay, let's give it a try, right? How do you go from going in something that, okay, it's maybe every once in a while, to something that is established business in consulting? Like, how do you figure out how much you're going to charge somebody? What is it that you need? I ask that not necessarily because you need to tell me how much you charge people, but there's a lot of people being laid off in tech, right? And I see a lot this trick on LinkedIn where people sort of say, "Oh, I started my own consulting company," so that they don't look like there's a gap on their resume. And so I'm just curious as to how that actually becomes a business.
Yeah, I mean, I didn't know much. I mean, I was just coming out of a PhD. I didn't have much of a business background, and so you kind of learn as you go. And so I think the biggest thing that I learned was not to take things personally. And I think it's especially hard as a one person or a small person company where, like, you write a proposal and someone says, like, we're not going to do that. It's not because of you. It could be bad business timing. They have different priorities. And so thinking through that more. But yeah, I mean, it took a lot of patience. I mean, I think it's incremental. Like, things change. You have to be prepared for that. Like, you get paid in big chunks, like, at a time. Like, it's not like every 2 weeks that you get a check in the mail and things like that. And so luckily, kind of, my wife has more of a kind of W-2 type job where it's kind of steady Eddie, and mine's a little kind of comes in chunks. And so that's a good balance. And yeah, and so you just kind of figure it out. And adapt as you go. And yeah, it's frustrating and you have to learn a lot of like the minutia of running a business and making sure these forms are filled out and these tax things are done, but you get better at it as you go.
Right. And how do you deal with the uncertainty? I feel like some people don't take the risk of doing something on their own because they want to look for the stability, right?
Yeah, it doesn't work for everybody. I mean, I think that's the reality of it. I think there is uncertainty, but I think there's also, I like the fact that I control a lot of my uncertainty. Like you could work at a big company and like Amazon, Google or whatever, and like you get laid off, right? You have no control of that. You don't get to make a lot of these decisions. So I get to have that freedom, flexibility. It comes at a cost in some ways of that uncertainty, but I think I would have never been able to do AMX or my podcast or the software if I were in a big company. Like it's too much of a pull. And so I get to do these mini experiments and some work, some don't, and you kind of move on. And so that's what I like about it. And I think that's a good price to pay or a good bargain for me.
Yeah. It's a balance, right? Like you said, and it doesn't work for everybody, but I do also like the perspective that you offer is that you can control a lot of things. So it's just a balance that way.
Yep, absolutely.
And you just mentioned your podcast. And so you're a fellow podcaster, right? And this is a podcast that is mostly focused on the additive manufacturing industry. Tell us more about it and then the kind of conversations that you have.
Yeah, so it was actually my second podcast that I started. A friend of mine named Henry Hansen, who was also doing a PhD, fellow American at Loughborough. When I was there, we had a podcast called the Sports Technology Podcast. The idea was to like, this was in the early days of podcasting. Now everyone has a podcast, right? But like the idea over there was to like interview people who were working in sports. And so 10 years later, I had kind of the same idea. No one had really been doing much of that in additive. There were a couple. And so the idea was like kind of interview people, hear about how they got into the space that they're in or the company that they're in, and hear like what that trajectory of career move was and how it relates to 3D printing. And so it's called 3 Degrees Discussions. It's on Spotify, it's on Apple, it's on all the major YouTube. It's a video podcast. And so I think we've got 112, 113 episodes. Wow. I try and do it once a week and about 40 to 60 minute conversations with people about their career in additive, really to kind of give perspective that like, hey, there's a lot of different ways to get to this industry or to be successful in it.
This is actually like a really great tool for the people that participate in your program so that they can get to understand what career trajectories look for people in the industry. Yeah,
absolutely. I mean, we've interviewed people all over the place, geography and background and companies and industry. So it's kind of a library tool at this point.
Yeah, fantastic. And Mike, so where do you want to see the additive manufacturing industry go? Or what is your vision for where the industry can go in the next couple of years or decades?
Yeah, I mean, I'm excited for like the variety of kind of production options that people have in terms of making end use parts and having it kind of more blend into just general manufacturing and kind of being one of those default tools that people use and evaluate. And just be more widespread. I'm excited really about the potential to bring manufacturing back to the US and have a strong manufacturing base here. I'm super passionate about that and encouraged by the ability of this technology to help with that. It's not an only solution, but it enables some different stuff that you may not have had the ability to do kind of 10, 15 years ago. So that's really what I'm excited about.
Great. And so this is the last question that we always ask our guests, just to close it on a light tone and then just get a little feel for the city that you're in. So imagine your best friend from, your PhD program in the UK came over to visit you in Chicago, but unfortunately you were at an AMUG in Orlando, I guess, and you're not able to show them around. What are the top things you would tell them to do or places to visit in Chicago?
Yeah, there's a handful of things. I mean, I live downtown, and so there's the architecture tour that goes on the boat on the Chicago River. So you get to see the kind of like you're looking up at all the buildings, and Chicago is a beautifully architectured city. Tons of great food on kind of Randolph Street, which isn't far. So kind of take the tour, go to Randolph Street. And then one thing I like to do is kind of walk along the lakeshore. We're right on Lake Michigan. And so there's 25 miles of lake, especially in the summertime, to go check out. And there's some amazing views up by the museum campus, by the Field Museum, and things that you can kind of see the whole city in the background. So kind of take a jog, go eat, and go on the architecture tour.
Perfect. I appreciate it. I've done one of those things. I've only been to Chicago once, and we walked the lake shore. So that was really nice.
Excellent. Yeah. Next time I'll go. All right. Well, Mike, thank you so much for joining us in the podcast today. Thank you.
Thank you for listening. If you want to put a face to the voices you just heard, follow us on Instagram, Twitter, and TikTok at LatinX Can. If you have questions or feedback, you can email us at latinxcan@gmail.com. And if you want to support our project, please leave a review. We have made it easy for you and added the links to the show notes. That's it for now. Don't forget to hit that subscribe button, and remember, unidos somos más.